Welcome to People, Planet, and Health, a podcast produced in conjunction and partnership with the Archdiocese of Atlanta and filmed in educational collaboration with Georgia Gwinnett College. In fact, the crew behind the camera, all graduates and students at GGC. Thanks, guys, for being here. So this podcast explores how people, planet, and health are connected, how change-making individuals working in community and faith-based centers can engage with sustainability in their faith journey as we move towards stewardship of all people and the environment. Today, we're going to be talking about water and how water is connected to life. We're sitting here at St. Andrew's Church here in Roswell, Georgia, and the Chattahoochee River is right behind us. And so, Dr. Larry, as we begin discussing water, we can't live without water for more than 3 days. How do you see water being significantly important in health, in our health, and in the health of the environment?
Well, thanks, Tom. A couple thoughts. I'm going to give you 2 words, and I want people to stick with it. We'll make those words pop. Turtles and junk. Now, I'm talking to you today from a spot far away from the well-watered Chattahoochee watershed. I'm in the Yellowstone River Valley watershed. This river is the longest free-running river in the United States. I'm up in a canyon about 10 miles north of the river. All rain that falls on the ground here goes into these rivers, past our homes and our communities. It gives us our municipal water, our irrigation water, empties into the sea, cycles back through storms and clouds and comes back, right? That's the water cycle. So what, you say? Water is a really interesting chemical for us as humans. Lots of things dissolve in it. In fact, if they didn't, we couldn't actually survive. Our bodies are hugely proportionately water. 45 to 50% of our bodies are water. In a way, we're like miraculous water balloons. And you say, well, why are we filled with water? It's because water is a magical substance chemically. Lots of things can attach to it, come into our bodies, stay in our bodies, be handled, used to make everything from cells to thoughts to ideas. This what powers the human entity along with our energy apparatus, and then it goes out again. And so rivers and lakes and the water cycle mirror the same principle. Water comes to us, through us, and beyond us, which is where the whole turtles and junk thing happens, right? Because as water does that, it brings whatever is in it to us, through us, and from us, and things can get stuck there. What do we want moving to, through, and from us? Healthy stuff. What do we want getting stuck in us? Healthy stuff. What do we want coming from us? This is the stewardship piece, healthy stuff. But the reality is water isn't a moral construct. Water will bring whatever. So if we put bad stuff in the water, to, through, and from us comes the bad stuff. Mm-hmm. So we are both a recipient and a producer of the things that water tracks. And of course we do this in a macro way too. Water is a transportation system for our ships, our goods, right, our boats, right? All the things that we humans use to move around. Water is that transportation system in our bodies and among our communities and economies and societies. And of course is integrally related to the ecosystem as a whole. I'll wrap this up and get back to you by saying turtles and junk help us understand open system thinking. And if we're going to be communities of stewardship these days, we need to understand open system principles, not because we decide or don't. This is the way the universe is designed. To us, through us, from us is the water. I'll be back.
So Jay, our communities have been centered around water forever. You know, villages appeared along rivers.
Right.
All the major cities are on rivers or on the coastlines. And then cities also have a significant impact sometimes on polluting those waterways. How does water sort of fuel the environment? How has it fueled our economies? How has it built our cities? I mean, what's the connection there?
Yeah, I think I'd really want to pick back up on what Larry talked about, stewardship and, water is life, right? As we're talking about an open system. So, as we sit here on the Chattahoochee is the watershed that feeds the city of Atlanta, which is 7.5 million people. But a lot of folks, even that live here in the city, don't realize it's one of the smallest watersheds for any major city in the world, quite frankly. And I think what we forget about is that, that water comes from the Appalachian Mountains, right, that come down, and it carries with it all the things that comes down, right? into the city. The city uses it for its use, whether it's irrigation for gardens, whether it's for use as water we drink, whether we use it for wastewater, sewage and wastewater, right? So there's all these inputs and outputs that come out of water. And once you get past the city of Atlanta, it flows all the way down to the Gulf Coast. But once it leaves here, guess what that water is being used to do? It goes down into southwest central Georgia, where it's used to irrigate plants and food that we eat. So remember what Dr. Larry said, that, you know, we bring the good stuff with the bad stuff, right? Well, we have to be thinking about, as we live in our urban area, about not only is it for us, but, you know, we have a shared responsibility, a stewardship of looking at water beyond just our own use for the common good that produces the food that's going to come back to Atlanta that we're going to eat. And then we go further down, and it goes down into, you know, Alabama, and it's used for industry and for cooling water. So the other connection to water to think about as we go down is that, you know, without it we couldn't generate power, because you have to have cooling water, and you have to produce steam to turn turbines, moving things to produce power. We're also causing other biodiversity and water ecology changes. It goes down to Florida, where it ends up in the coast, which again, who lives on the coast, and what are they doing? Well, there's a whole shrimp industry.
Oysters.
And oysters.
Dr.
Right?
Larry's turtles.
Dr. Larry's turtles. That is part of our ocean ecology, which is critical to how we live. Are we taking good or bad stuff down there? But also, again, this is the seafood that gets harvested that we eat back here in Atlanta at our, you know, nice high-end restaurants.
They're taking that water in and filtering it as well.
Exactly.
And so whatever extra things are in there, or good things, they're collecting those into their systems.
Right. And so I live in a neighborhood, and, you know, like all neighborhoods, at least here in the South, we've got a water retention pond. And that retention pond is actually the headwaters for the Yellow River, which goes down to Brunswick, right, which is a very sensitive ecological area. I'm standing here in front of my neighborhood subdivision pond. As you can see, it's a retention pond. That's also an amenity. And as you will see, there are a number of inputs that come in from stormwater from across the street, from other neighborhoods that come into this pond. And then they discharge through that weir there that you see that goes down into a creek that forms the headwaters for the Yellow River. You know, I'm always thinking about that retention pond and things that flow from our streets, pesticide and fertilizers that go into that pond that become the headwaters for a major river that in the end is, you know, where we see folks like, you know, fishermen down there on the coast that are using that to survive and eat, as well as, again, the ecology it supports. So it's a way of thinking about that drop of water, not so much from our sink or our toilet, though that's important, but that open system where it starts from where we live. Think about that in our faith. Think about that in, you know, the green grass that we have, or the water we use in our pollinator gardens or in our food producing gardens, that these things are all interconnected.
Good insight there, Jay, on impact of water and its far-reaching. You talked about two river systems there, the Chattahoochee and the Yellow River.
Right.
And what people may not realize is that the Chattahoochee flows into the Gulf of Mexico,
right,
and then the next watershed over, the next river system over, the Yellow River, flows into the Atlantic Ocean. So here, these two close systems here end up in very, very distant locations.
Right. And just one cultural connection with that. If you look at history, that continental divide of where water flowed was also the border line, the boundary line for different indigenous nations.
Right.
They divided up their nations based on watershed.
Exactly.
We don't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Kat, there's also a spiritual component of water. Here we have the Catholic Church uses holy water. We baptize with water. The rest of the world also sees water in spiritual ways. Talk about the spiritual implications that water has in history, in the Bible, but also today.
Well, start out within the beginning, right? God created the heaven and the earth, and he actually separated land by bodies of water. So he made the water, he made the seas. He spent a whole day creating the life that would live in the seas. So water was a really important part of our faith story from the very beginning. You go through all of the Old Testament and the different things with water. We see even as the Israelites wandered in the desert, there's a very specific picture that paints of this lack of water, this lack of life. And they were reaching toward that promised land, and that promised land was no longer the desert, but a land teeming with life. So water had to be a part of that. But then you get into the New Testament, and there's so much about water. Not only do we look at our faith is based on baptism with water, we also look at the fact that water is used as part of celebrating our Eucharist, our communion, every time, mixing the water with the wine. We also look at the fact that people bless themselves and others with holy water. We look at the part that water plays just in justice. The justice that the church reaches out to make sure that people have safe water in which they can thrive. And I'll paint a real quick picture for you. When you're over in some of the developing countries, like where I've been in Africa, and you're looking at that same river that you guys have been talking about, where the people here are washing their vehicles and their animals in this water, and just a few kilometers down, there are people bathing in the water, and then a few more kilometers down, there are people literally getting their jugs of drinking water. How important it is that we not only take care of it, but our faith says this water is life. And we have to be aware of how we're treating water. Think about the people drinking at the end of that cycle of water. Water is what keeps us going. It's what gives us life. We have to be aware, our faith calls us to be aware of exactly how we're treating water.
So Kat, you actually had a recent trip to Savannah at the bottom of a watershed here.
I did.
And you had a chance to talk to some people about water and spirituality. Can we take a look at that interview?
Let's do that.
We're on the Butler River on Butler Island in McIntosh County, Georgia. And this is part of the watershed that Altamaha Riverkeeper serves to protect. We cover the entire Altamaha Basin, starting in the headwaters in Atlanta and above Athens, Georgia, that flow all the way south on the Ocmulgee through Macon and on the Oconee through Milledgeville to come together at the confluence that forms the Altamaha River that then flows 137 miles here to the coast of Georgia. This is brackish water, so this is tidal water that has ocean water pushing up into it and river water flowing down it on a twice a day cycle as the tides move in and out. So where we are currently is not a source for drinking water for our community. But we would want to make sure that this water is safe for our seafood industry and for local fishermen who like to fish off of this bridge back behind me, for them to be able to safely eat what they catch out of this water, for kayakers who use this launch right here to come in and out and enjoy these waters, boaters, and for the wildlife that live in the estuary and live on land and depend on this aquatic ecosystem. And one of the big issues was water withdrawal upstream, preventing enough water from continuing to flow down the Altamaha. And another big issue was a pulp mill upstream and the pollution coming from their discharge.
Obviously, what happens in Atlanta does not stay in Atlanta because it makes its way down from the Yellow River all the way down here to the coast. And so there's really no way. We think of like, oh, we'll just throw it in the water, we'll throw it in a landfill, but there really is no way. It still ends up somewhere and it affects the communities who are downstream.
Somebody everywhere is downstream of what you're putting in the water, and you're downstream from someone else. So it affects everyone, and not just what's flowing downstream, but the water cycle, right? So the water is universal, cycling through the water cycle, and that's one of the big problems that is now being discovered with PFAS, is that it's cycling in the water cycle. So it's being found pretty much everywhere.
I'm Beth Remis with Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. We inspire and equip faith communities to care for creation. You've likely heard it said that water is life, There is such a reverence for water. I mean, not only does it provide and nourish us, it's part of our rituals and ceremonies. It's also so many people go to the river or the ocean for contemplation, for solace, to have those conversations with God as a way of communion, really. So there is something innate, I think, in us that longs for that connection. And I think that's why we gravitate towards it. So if we are involved in advocacy and social justice issues, more so than just handling that specific problem, the challenge here is also to look upstream and see what's causing that at a systemic level and see if that might be a place where we can intervene.
One of the things that I found in speaking with those two women as we were on the river itself and in that setting was how much water means in terms of spirituality. We talked about it. People meditate with water. They meditate near water, whether it's near a river or along the beach as you hear the ocean come in. And for those who practice any kind of spirituality, water plays such an important part. But it was also really nice that as we had the conversation, that sound of the water running in the background, the reminder that water is so integral and so much a part of who we are, that to leave it out of our practice of our faith and our spirituality would be unheard of.
Right.
So Jay, you've had a chance to talk with some water professionals here in Gwinnett County.
Right.
The Yellow River Trail, and then also John Butler from the Gwinnett County Watershed Department.
Right.
Let's take a look at that short now.
People just don't realize geographically how connected we really are. And I think this is one of the most important things about water. Very simply put, very obviously, water flows downhill. It doesn't care about political boundaries. It doesn't care about property lines. Water is going to take the path of least resistance. For us here in Gwinnett County, we're in a very interesting or unique position where we're at the headwaters of a very large watershed that's called the Ocmulgee River Basin, roughly in the middle of the state. What we do here on our small little first and second order streams in our backyards and in our neighborhoods is actually connected through water all the way down to the Atlantic Ocean. And so if you follow the Yellow River, it goes down and it enters Jackson Lake. That flows into the Ocmulgee River, which eventually joins the Altamaha before going into the Atlantic Ocean.
Pretty much the yellow flows between neighborhoods. It doesn't really flow through any industrial areas. As you were to go farther down the 50-mile length of the yellow, you'll get more into rural areas, which is farmland. So what are the impacts on the river? In the urban area, there's litter, there's chemicals, there's much more opportunity for pollution. In the suburban river, not so much. Chemicals may wash into the river from people's lawns, from fertilizing and so forth. Litter washes in from bridges unless the counties have built stormwater containment areas for that litter to collect in. But when you get into the rural areas, pretty much it's farming. If the farmers let their cows or their pigs into the river, you have issues with that. Mostly herbicides, pesticides from the farming. As you get around the ports and more industrial areas there, right before the water flows into the ocean, there's more of an issue with pollution there. This is a natural environment that a lot of animals depend on, and it's an important feature in your community. And yet you can see it collects litter every now and then when the water's up. Specifically, single-use plastic. That's the worst thing, and that's the largest quantity. That and tennis balls, styrofoam. And therefore, as people become more aware that there's a river here, that it's a clean, healthy river, and it's being assaulted by litter, they care about the river. They become more cognizant of their behavior around the river. And they'll advocate for the river with their peers.
To get some of the public involved in some citizen science initiatives and expose them to kind of the reality of what our urban environment is all about and how that impacts water quality and our little pockets of nature that are left behind in areas, even like Gwinnett County, that are very densely populated and very much developed. We want to be able to show people that there's still a lot of value in the nature, in the wildlife, and the water resources that we have in these areas, and that we can go out and we can collect samples and we can analyze this water to determine what is the real health of our streams and our watersheds here in Gwinnett County.
What we do when we talk to the counties and the cities along the way is we try to stress that they be sure to follow the regulations around development, silt fences, stormwater retention. If the water during a rain event is not contained and metered back into the river in a controlled manner, then it flows into it in an uncontrolled manner. And that's not good for the people who are drawing drinking water out of it downstream, or the animals, the otters.
So there's a lot of things that we can do at home to help mitigate some of these impacts of stormwater. So I'm talking about using rain barrels and rain gardens in our homes. I always say, you don't have to do it all. Just do something to help protect water quality and prevent pollution. If we all do that within this one watershed, then we can start moving in the right direction as far as protecting water quality and conserving these water resources.
They know they have a responsibility throughout Gwinnett of making sure that water meets not just regulatory requirements, things like water quality standards, or how much total maximum daily load is what they call it. How much pollutants can you put in there? What does that mean? What's that bad you put in that goes down? But they're also trying to find ways to restore and make sure that we're letting nature have the ability to replenish and clean it as it goes. So things like the Yellow River, when we look at it around wetlands and the wetlands it supports and how that is a cleanse for water. If we looked at our previous podcast on community garden, what Brandon talked about, that they were putting a pollinator garden in as a way of filtering water before it went into the ditch, so we end up with better water. So those are some of the programs that county and government that they're trying to do, is to look at ways to let that open system operate in a way that as nature intended, to be able to do that, knowing that we as people and we as people in urban communities disrupt that. We think we pay a lot of money for water utilities or stormwater, but that's part of what we're paying for, is how do we integrate this with nature and the cycle of nature, so that as Kat says, when it goes down to the next user down in Conyers or to the south, that they're getting the same quality of water that we got to use, right? And we're letting nature do its thing beyond just the infrastructure pieces of things like wastewater treatment.
Faith-based justice calls for us to take care of. And we typically think of taking care of one another, of the people. But the part that we often forget or miss is taking care of the water, taking care of that which takes care of us.
Right.
So when you are looking at our obligation to provide safe, clean, usable drinking water, that is our way of caring for the water that God has given us.
So Larry, you mentioned turtles earlier, and there's more to that story. You want to tell us about that?
I want to pick up a little bit where Kat left off, this idea of water as an element in our faith communities, and water as really the scientific basis for life as we understand it. Water, carbon, and oxygen. You don't have those, you are not alive. I'm not talking about whether you want to or not. It's just chemically not possible. Insofar this is a podcast sponsored by the Archdiocese of Atlanta, there's appropriate emphasis on Laudato Si and Pope Francis and Catholicism and the Christian Bible. It's interesting to note that water as an element of faith, rituality, sacredness is in every faith tradition I can name. Full disclosure, I am not a scholar on Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, indigenous religions. I'm simply noting, if you go look at all these things, you cannot escape water in any faith dimension. And you say, well, why is that? It's because water really is kind of the ultimate connector between science, how the world works as we observe it, what is, not what we want to be or wish not to be, but what we can observe as the way the universe is built. Faith tells us why, and what should we do with this, and how should we live in harmony, sacred harmony with these realities. So water helps us understand the faith connection ritualistically as well as pragmatically, which brings us the turtle's junk, right? So in the Yellowstone River, you'll be hearing from a friend of mine, Kehan Ostavar, who's a biology professor at Rocky Mountain College. And Kehan's got a group of people that he's part of and helps facilitate that's created a lot of really dynamic energy. They do something called the Yellowstone River Clean. And they got boats and waders and with hooks and with gloves, and they pull stuff out of the river. And you say, well, that's nice, right? It's kind of like exfoliating your face maybe, right, for the river. Well, it turns out what's in that river is pretty devastating. I mean, they've pulled out hundreds of thousands of pounds. That's not hundreds of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds. Cars, tires, pipes, drums filled with chemicals over the years. So Kehan, thanks for taking a few minutes to talk with us today. Turtles and junk, Yellowstone River. Talk to us from your point of view as sort of a orchestrator, facilitator, participant in those two topics.
All right. Well, I appreciate the title because it's a pretty fitting title for what we're trying to do on the river here. So turtles, we've got 3 native turtle species in Montana. We're focusing on 2 of the larger turtles that sit at the top of the kind of the food chain, and we consider them as biosentinels. So turtles are good indicators of the health of the ecosystem.
Kind of like a canary in a coal mine. Is that what a biosentinel is?
Yeah, exactly like a canary in the coal mine. Turtles are particularly unique because they're long-lived. Mm-hmm. They integrate the aquatic and terrestrial environments with their life history. So turtles, these are very aquatic river turtles, but they nest on shore. So their eggs are incubating on shore. They can absorb toxins from shorelines. Those hatchlings have to make it back to the water system. So there's kind of a connection between the riparian zone and the river itself.
It's kind of like one of the things I like to say, that turtle eggs and turtles, things move to them, through them, might get stuck in them, and then go from them again.
Yep, and might be passed from the mother to the eggs and hatchlings as well. Mm-hmm. So it can be passed on. We're looking at several different angles of the river here. We're looking at river dynamics. So how do functioning rivers, healthy functioning rivers work? And the Yellowstone, I think as you've mentioned, Larry, is the longest free-flowing river in the lower 48 states. So because it doesn't have a big dam, it still has the high spring floods from snowmelt. So it's a snowmelt-driven Great Plains river. There are a lot of human influences on it. We have a lot of irrigation, low-head diversion dams on the river, but we don't have a big hydroelectric system there. We can compare it to other rivers like the Bighorn River or the Tongue River that are dammed, the tributaries of the Yellowstone, to see how that functioning river, that free-flowing river, how it performs differently. Particularly, we're looking at two questions really at this point in time. We're looking at how the river's functioning, so the river dynamics, and they need gravel nesting bars, particularly the soft-shell turtles. So on the Yellowstone, these are big soft-shell turtles that really, for both species actually, we're at the northwestern extent of their range distribution, so we're kind of in a unique zone. If they're doing well, if their populations are doing well, if they have nice distributions of age classes or size classes, so we can sample them, catch them, measure and weigh them, and look at their sex ratios, look at the ratios of juveniles to adults, and see, is that population healthy, basically. And if they're healthy, that's probably because the river is functioning well. So then what we're doing is we're comparing, again, the free-flowing Yellowstone to the dammed river on the Bighorn to see how are they different. Our recommendations are that the hydroelectric operations managers start to mimic. We can start looking at what does the Yellowstone do to start better mimicking the timing of the flows and the peaks, and that would help create habitat, but also not inundate nest sites. If they release water too late or too early, it can inundate nest sites, or if they nest too late, then they'll just freeze to death in the nest because we're at the far edge of their distribution. So they kind of have a really short, perfect window when they can nest.
We live in Billings, Montana. We live in a farming community up and down the river. It's nice to think about the turtles, but so what? How does that affect us? These turtles actually show us what the cadence of that river is doing when it's healthy, or if it's carrying bad stuff, right? Chemicals or spills, because the river's used a lot, right? It's these rivers have been used in this part of the world as travelways for millennia, right? And you're saying the turtles tell us a story kind of what, not just what's going on, but what has happened as well.
In addition to just the dynamics of the river, the function of the river, we're looking at environmental contaminants. So, and kind of a couple different classes. We're looking at heavy metals as one that's kind of more
almost like mercury, like what?
Mercury's a big one, lead, but there's a whole other suite of metals that we're looking at. Kind of we do a whole panel. And the reason we started doing that is because the USGS identified this region as having high mercury in fish tissue. So that was kind of what drove the starting of that part of the study.
Mercury in human tissue causes a lot of really damaging effects.
Turtles being at the top of the food chain, they're bioaccumulating these environmental contaminants. And then there's some emerging contaminants that are becoming a concern as well. And some recent EPA and USGS surveys have also, and Montana DEQ have identified the Yellowstone River as having PFAS contaminants.
Why do you want to know about PFAS?
So PFAS are kind of this new class of 12,000 plus chemicals that are out there that are found in a lot of things that we all use every day. Let's look at turtles. Turtles bioaccumulate heavy metals. They would accumulate PFAS as well. This would be the first study in the United States looking at PFAS in turtles. Again, they're long-lived. They're in the water all the time. They're eating organisms that are also in the water. So they're testing the water for us every second of the day, right? Instead of just taking a water sample, which is a one-time sample. We have many different PFAS chemicals that are in the turtles, and we're kind of looking at where those turtles are from now. So we're looking, upriver Billings, downriver Billings. We're looking at tributaries to try to identify what are the types of PFAS, what are the concentrations, and where are we finding them the most, and then where can that take us in terms of management and public awareness, right. about this issue.
One of our other podcasts was about plastic, and we talked about the fact that, like the turtles, we humans are like this too. Things can come to us, through us, and out, but they get stuck. And when they get stuck, they can change our DNA, they can cause our inflammatory mechanisms to go out of whack. Whether you like a river or a turtle or not, or you think about the air or the water or not, these things are affecting us no matter what we're paying attention to as we're going through our day. Let's shift gears a little bit, maybe just by way of scale. So it seems to me that we've been talking about micro junk getting stuck in the turtles and helping us understand what that means about the health of the river in general, as well as what clean or dirty water or chemicals in the water mean for humans. Let's talk about macro junk, because you and I living here know you can canoe or kayak or swim or wade down the Yellowstone River, and you have a combination of an amazing outdoor experience, and then you see old cars and you see tires. And
we wanted to figure out how to also instill in our students at Rocky Mountain College, what can they do to really make a difference in their community? Let them know there are things that they can do that today makes a difference. Not, way down the road might make a difference. And sometimes with these, environmental contaminants, that's very complex, the management's very complex, the regulatory system is very complex, but cleaning up the visible trash on the river, which does add chemicals to the river, and microplastics, as you were mentioning, what can we do about that? So we started at a very small scale. We had, I think, it was 3 canoes and 1 raft. It was our first cleanup. We removed hundreds of pounds of trash from the river, and since then, every year it's just kind of built as we've had more partners, more volunteers, more students. We're now working, more than 2,000 hours a year on this project. We have shore teams and river teams. This year, we set a record. We had 15,000 plus pounds collected that day. We weigh and recycle all the metal we pick up, so we get a really good weight on that. In the past, we've counted tires since the very beginning, plus just weight of trash, we always called it. But now we're getting much more specific with that as well, because if we want to really make a difference, we need to know what kind of trash we have.
I don't know if you measure this, but one of the points of this podcast/vodcast is to help people certainly become aware, but to also be energized and not depressed. And you look at some of this stuff these days and you think, wow, we're so far behind. What can one little person do? I guess one of the things I'd like you to comment on is something I think you can see in the Instagram feed, Yellowstone River Research. There's a lot of energy there. Most of us live near a river because water is pretty important to human communities. And so if people were listening to you and they're near a river or a creek near them and are maybe a little bit more curious now, how healthy is that thing, both on its own for the creatures that actually live there and the ones that also live there near it, us, what would be your thought about where to start? Especially to start in a way where they maybe were more encouraged with everything they did rather than feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, it takes quite a bit to organize a cleanup. I mean, especially a community-driven cleanup. But you can just do work on your own as well. There are quite a few larger international organizations. We just joined up with Ocean Conservancy this year. They actually asked us to share our data with them.
Think about that, people. The Ocean Conservancy, that's oceans. We're a long way in Montana from any ocean. Actually will find you, right? So
they want to know what's happening inland, right? They want to know what is happening on our rivers and how does that affect oceans. And there's other international groups that have identified the top 1,000 polluting rivers of the world and are trying to target those.
For people to get ideas, they can go to Yellowstone River Research on Instagram and sort of get a visual of this, is right?
Yeah, the Ocean Conservancy actually has kind of like templates for if you want to start your own, also, and tools and equipment, things to think about. There's liability to think about. We buy insurance for everybody that comes and joins us. So there's a lot of layers to doing it well, but you can also just do it by yourself. and I've had students who've gone on and started these in their home communities, wherever they've settled. So there's other cities in Montana that are starting to do this, but also it's important to keep track of what you're doing too, so that we can understand what are the problems. Can we make changes to our systems? Can we provide stormwater traps that trap this? Can we change the amount of plastic we use? What are the things in our everyday lives that we can do differently too? So we need the data to inform, changes.
So I think the challenge we have in this podcast is, for the listeners and watchers, is hopefully we're putting some things in front of you that you're curious about and interested about and maybe concerned about, and then ask, what next, how can we get involved? And that's an arc that'll take us somewhere healthy if we all link together. Keon, thanks a ton.
Thank you
for sharing the story and being part of the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Turtles are like a time capsule. And he's tracking in the turtles how the toxins are coming to them, through them, and like the junk in the river, getting stuck in the junk of the turtles' bodies. I can tell you as a doctor, when we think about our water supply, whether it's the whole planet or it's the Chattahoochee watershed, Yellow River impoundment ponds and things like this, or the irrigation ditches where I live here in this dry country, what that water brings to and through us is either health or harm. So now we get back to this sort of ministerial piece, right? What do we want? We all want health for ourselves, our families, our communities. We now need to start thinking both as, at all levels, as individuals and families, as communities, as faith communities, as societies, as governments. Not just, is this true or not? It is true. Clean water is healthier people are healthier communities, etc. This is part of our faith ministry. It's frankly part of our health identity. The real question is, what will we do? And that's where we have to get practical, right? If you're drinking water out of a plastic bottle, you're actually putting harm in your body. We're not going to go over all the research right now, but stop drinking out of a plastic bottle. Small thing. Then we have to say, what do we know about our municipal water supply? How clean is it? How do we know? What things come to us and get stuck in us from water? The big body of literature on that. And then we get to politics and government, right? How do we use our governments as self-governing free people, communal people, to say, let's have healthy water, not just for some people who've got a special filter for their body or their refrigerator, but what does health for all look like? And this is where we go back to Kat's idea of connection, stewardship of justice, right? The health of our ecological community, the health of our human community, and the health of our bodies are not distinct. They are connected. They run through the turtles, the junk gets stuck in the river, and our bodies are one more waterway that stuff comes through to and from. We all want that to be healthy. From the doctor angle, what gets stuck in our body? All sorts of things, right? Objects like plastic. Apparently we have about a credit card worth of plastic embedded in our bodies now. We talked about that in an earlier podcast. Carcinogens, things that cause cancer, things that cause inflammatory and autoimmune diseases, things that affect women's reproductive health. You can't get pregnant anymore. Things that affect male fertility. I could go on boring hours on this short podcast, all the things that water puts in our bodies that cause these stuck and now causing harm effects. Nobody wants that. So water becomes literally the river of life. Not a metaphor. I mean, it is a metaphor. See Huck Finn, but it is truly the river of life in our bodies.
So Jay, let's look back at the technology piece here. We've got pretty advanced water treatment and wastewater treatment. Do we need to do better? I mean, what is the status of the technology that's supporting clean water, creating clean water? Are we doing enough?
So I want to talk about technology in a different sense. Our tendency is always to look at what's the technology that's going to improve our lives, right? And that's what we rely on to do that improvement. I think Larry really touched on something interesting, this connection between science and people in a different way. And that's why I want to bring the Yellow River Trail into this, because these are people that are expressing science and people in a real way in that river system. Why is that? Because, yeah, we have great technology in Gwinnett, one of the best wastewater treatment plants probably east of the Mississippi, but it's not enough. We have people out there, and it's all up and down the river that represents one piece, that come together in their community to improve the water quality beyond what technology can do. Because they go out there in that river and they're looking at things like, how is the river running? Do we have invasive species? Do we have plastics and trash that we need to pick up. And they actually kind of like own it and maintain a piece of this water. And they embed science in a real way of people interacting with science in the ecology itself. And they're learning from each other as they do that. There'll always be ways to improve technology, but the question is, when we talk about water and the river of life, and we talk about stewardship, we all have a responsibility to understand the science and to be part of that ecology. And it's groups like the River Keepers that show that in action and actually make that happen. And I think the last thing I want to touch on that is that water is also a place of recreation. It's a way of connection to nature. And so when you look at like the Yellow River, what they do, the Yellow River Trail, they're also keeping it open for recreation, that people can go in there with kayaks and canoe. And as we say, meditate with nature and maybe listen to nature differently. That's an important part of stewardship.
I want to dive into that just a little deeper, because I think that after God created all of this, he rested.
Yeah.
And we are called as people of faith to take time to rest, to time out of the busyness of life and rest. And one of the ways we do that is through recreation. And we're sitting right here at St. Andrew's Catholic Church, and right next to us on this same property is where we have people coming to be out on the river, whether they're doing it through kayaking or they're doing it competitively through rowing events and things like that.
Right.
We use water in so many ways for restful purposes, laying on a raft out in the ocean, in our pools, swimming laps, putting your feet in the stream as it goes by and cooling you off on a hot summer day. Even the ice, being out on that frozen water, is a part of our recreation. It's a part of how we not only rest and relax, it's a part of how we commune with nature.
Right.
Water in its natural form is not only what gives us health for drinking and allows us to be alive, but it gives our bodies ways to rest and recuperate.
Right.
And so Jay talked about technology and how we learn to maybe relate a little bit differently, with this idea of water. And then Kat brought up this great idea. Water is fun. It's life-giving. No, that cool stream in a dry desert canyon, say, water. It's just like, water, this is great, right?
Right.
I've been working all day in the sun, cold water. So we have so many life-giving experiences of water. And I wanted to touch base on Jay's thought about technology, because I think it's easy for us, whether it's as individuals or governments or faith communities, to think of technology as a remote thing that will sort of sci-fi our way out of this. And really, when you look at the water cycle and this open system idea, the ecology itself, the ecology of our bodies and the ecology of the ecosystem, have filters and purifiers for waters. So in rivers, wetlands are enormous purifiers of water.
Right.
Our bodies can actually cleanse water through our liver and our kidneys to an extent. So part of this technology conversation, this design of clean water, is what we call, hard technology, right? Routers, switches, artificial intelligence, pipes, all that hard and soft technology. But another part of it is, as called by this idea of open systems, to, through, and from, it's this idea of relating. If we relate differently to water and to land and the way it moves through us and our communities, we now are not just designing technology, we're relating in an interactive way with the design of how water is healthy on our lands and waters. In other words, we start thinking about wetlands and we start thinking about river cleanups. We start thinking about how humans relate to each other and this idea of healthy water. And then we use both natural and human design ways to complement each other to really say, look, this gives us what we want. It gives us health, it gives us commerce, it gives us joy and fun, it gives us access, everybody, poor or rich, to clean water.
Right.
And so I think that shift from hard remote technology, some geek will figure it out, I hope that happens someday and I'm kind of powerless, to wait a minute. We as a dynamic community can relate more completely with the idea of water, and water as life, water as health, water as me, water as all of us. And that starts to take us some pretty positive places, no matter where you plug in.
One of the programs that many local governments do, and they do that in cooperation with communities, is a program called Adopt a Stream. It's a really interesting place of bringing science in, because you're asking people in the community that are working to, improve these waterways, to look at recreation, to bring diverse community together around water, but they're also bringing science because they're actually doing the sampling analysis and they're looking at the chemical compositions. So they're learning about the ecology and the science behind it that then the county uses, right, to be able to design programs that do bring some of that technology that we talked about, help the natural ecology do its thing. And we gather that data. So, it's an interesting place because we look at science with people in the lived experience of water, but they're also connected to the science behind it in ways that they learn a lot and then is of value for our shared responsibility for the common good.
And that was exactly what I talked about with one of Georgia's coastal river keepers. We talked a lot about that whole idea of what the river keepers as individuals do and how they gather community to actually extend the work that they're doing, right, so that the community comes together for the common good to care for our water.
We talked about river keepers, river cleanups, we talked about water trails, we talked about watershed departments. All these organizations are also involved in gathering, like you said, community, volunteers to become part of doing their work. A great way for you to get involved in helping solve this problem, Jay, you said the technology we're using isn't enough.
Right.
So we need to step in to help fill that gap. And getting involved with a water-based organization in your community is a great way to experience being part of that, but also to experience the benefits, the joys of being around water, being in water, and then seeing the change that can happen. I mean, Larry talked about tons and tons of stuff getting pulled out of rivers.
Tens of thousands.
That's a lot. You will be surprised. But there's also an amazing sense of gratification in seeing that happen and knowing it's no longer polluting and damaging these ecosystems.
And I think the last thing is water is a great equalizer, right? We can bring, everyone has spiritual beliefs. And they don't always have to be religious beliefs, but water becomes a great place to really explore connection to each other in spirituality in some really interesting ways.
Laudato Si, yes, was sent to the Catholic Church by Pope Francis, but he reaches out, he calls it out to people of goodwill,
right?
Not to Catholics,
to all
not
people.
To Christians. Jay, to your point, being a steward of the environment, doesn't matter what your belief system is. We're all capable of getting the benefits of it and feeling the connection to water, to the environment as we're participating in that.
Right, and with each other.
Yes, and the community aspect of that
right.
as well.
Right.
So I think if you want to look at it from the birth to death type of thing, what do we talk about? When a woman's giving birth, her water breaks. So water is in that very first moment of birth. And we look at through baptism and through all of the ways in which we cleanse ourselves and live and take in water throughout our whole lives. But then think about Jesus on the cross. And when his side was pierced, and the scriptures are absolute when they say, from his side poured forth water. So at the end of life, that loss of Christ's water that he shed for us, that's a pretty powerful statement, symbolic statement of how important water is to us as people, as God's people.
Right.
So water is life. That was the theme of today's episode, and great insights from all of you. Thank you for sharing your perspective and exploring these connections. It's amazing how all of these things are connected, from the community aspect of water, from the just how we treat water so it's drinkable, and then treat it as wastewater so it's then drinkable by the next community downstream, and then even how the environment itself, those rivers, continue cleaning the water in the biology there. How we all really are filters of what water carries, and how we need to be thinking about what we're exposed to in water. Our next episode is also going to talk about something related, which is the air around us. Air also carries things that we don't necessarily want inside us, and air, of course, is also the breath of life that sustains us, in addition to the water of life.
We'd love to hear from some of our viewers about what stories did we miss? What are other ways that people are incorporating water into their daily lives and the importance of caring for water?
How was this conversation helpful to you personally, right? Maybe you had an idea, you know what? I never thought of that before. Now I'm thinking this way. All of that, we're doing this to help positively welcome and stir you up. So let us know, did we stir you up?
What do they now see that they can't unsee would be great feedback.
We do want to share this knowledge in hopes that we can expand this effort to come together as caring people who care about the planet and others around us. So thanks for joining us today in this conversation as we talk about people, planet, and health. See you in the next episode.